Hello and welcome to the Advanced English podcast. Today's episode, I don't have a plan, really. Today's episode is different from yesterday's because, as I was talking about in yesterday's episode, I was in a rush. Today, I'm not in a rush. Yesterday, I recorded the podcast before work, before going to work. Today, I'm recording it after getting back from work. The day is over, work is finished, I'm back home, and the day is over, and I'm not in a rush. There's still some things that I want to do today, tonight, because it's getting dark. It's nearly night time. There are things I want to do. I don't want to waste my time. I want to use my time well. So I don't want the podcast to go on for too long, but I'm not in a rush. I've got things to do, but I don't have anywhere to be. There's nowhere where I have to be. There's nowhere where I have to go. So I'm not in a rush. But even though I'm not in a rush, I am a bit tired. I'm not exhausted because I only work for 3 hours, but I'm a little bit exhausted. How do you say it? Exhaustion. To be exhausted means you're really tired. You did too much, and it's a struggle. It's difficult to keep going. It's difficult to think, and it's difficult to do anything because you're exhausted. I'm maybe only a little bit exhausted. I'm tired from the day. So the way I'm talking in this podcast is probably the complete opposite of how I talked yesterday. Yesterday, I was keeping track of the time. I was setting a pace. I was keeping myself to a pace, making sure I was talking fast enough, staying on track, not talking about many different things without much reason. I was staying on track, and I had a good pace. I wasn't going very fast, but I was talking without pause, without pausing. Today, I think it's going to be a bit more difficult because not only am I not in a rush, but also I'm a bit tired. I'm a bit exhausted. So there's two reasons why today it is a bit different. Why today I might be less on track. I might find it a bit more difficult to keep track of what I'm talking about. So maybe I change from one topic to another without any reason. Maybe I just forget what I was talking about more often than I did yesterday. This podcast, the reason I'm doing it is because I'm learning Spanish with comprehensible input. I'm learning Spanish, and the main source of input that I'm using at the moment is a podcast called Spanish with Juan, Español con Juan. And this is my main source. So in fact, at the moment, for the last few weeks, it's been the only thing I've been listening to in Spanish. It's my only source of Spanish input. And I've been liking it. I've been liking it a lot. I listen to it in the morning, and it's something I look forward to. At night, before going to bed, I look forward to listening to it the next morning. And when I wake up in the morning, it's still difficult to get up. It's difficult to get out of bed. I don't look forward to the podcast so much, to the Spanish podcast so much, that I jump out of bed. But I look forward to it in the morning as well. And Juan, the man who does the podcast, who records the podcast, he says it's an intermediate level podcast. But like I said in the first episode, these levels are pretty inexact. They're rough. You can't use them in a precise way. I'd say, according to Dreaming Spanish, I'm advanced in Spanish because I was watching advanced level videos and understanding nearly 100%, nearly everything I heard. And this intermediate podcast is actually a bit more of a challenge for me, but I still understand nearly everything. But whatever the case, whether it's intermediate or advanced, whatever you want to call it, this format, this style of input of a podcast where one person talks about random things, really. Doesn't really talk about something consistent. It's not a podcast with one subject or one theme. Every episode's a bit of a ramble. He rambles, he talks about lots of different things and jumps from one thing to another. And for me, I find it good. It's a very natural sort of language you're hearing. It's not... Actually, I think he himself, Juan, expressed it very well in one of the podcast episodes, because he says he's learning French So he listens to a lot of podcasts in French. And he says most of the podcasts he listens to in French aren't like his podcast. They're more structured. They're more, I think he said, they're more like as if you were reading an article, a news article, or something like that. They're very structured. And that sort of podcast I don't like. I find it very boring because it's funny in a way, because I find the more, when I listen to things, the more structured they are, the more there's this effort to make sure the people are always saying something that's been planned, the less it seems to me that they're actually talking about anything. The more structure there is, the more of a strict plan there is, the more it seems to me that the people are just saying things that don't mean anything. Whereas podcasts like Juan's, like Spanish with Juan, where he's just talking about all these different things without much structure, it seems to me what he's saying is much more meaningful. It's much closer to real language. I don't mean real language in the sense of proper grammar or educated word choice. I don't mean the form of the language is real or meaningful. I mean literally that it has meaning. I understand what he's talking about. It creates imagery, it creates meaning in my mind when I hear it. But more structured content doesn't do that as much. I spend a while listening and I understand what the words mean, but they're so lifeless, they're so predictable, they're so meaningless because they're just there to give a structure. But I don't want to listen to a structure. I want to listen to someone saying things that mean something in the language I want to learn. Because otherwise you can't really have comprehensible input. And on top of that, it's boring. It's really boring listening to this structured content. And I find so much of what I listen to is like that, unfortunately, because I'm learning both Spanish and German, and so I spend a lot of time looking for content, looking for things to listen to in Spanish and German, and it's very hard to find anything that isn't completely, utterly boring. Boring because it's not really about anything. And again, this is the irony. This is what's funny, is that the more the content, the more the podcast or the radio program, the more it claims, the more it tries to be about something specific, the less I feel it's about anything. The more it tries to be very precise and very focused on a specific subject, the more meaningless it seems to me it is what they say. Maybe that's just my personality. Maybe for each person it's different, but maybe that's part of it. But I have a feeling, I suspect. What does suspect mean? It means I think it's probably true. I don't really have any evidence to back up my belief, to back up my suspicion, but I still think I'm probably right. I suspect that that it's not something that is different for other people, at least partly, at least to a large extent. I think everyone must find these very formal, very structured, very structured style of content quite boring. Maybe because more people listen to it when they're doing something else. I don't tend to do that. For me, I can't follow something if I'm doing something else. If I'm washing the dishes in the kitchen or hanging up the clothes, hanging them up to dry after washing them. If I'm doing something like that and also listening to a podcast in the background, I can't pay attention very well. I can't follow what's being said very well. Maybe so I don't really do it. When I listen to a podcast, I sit down and listen to it without doing anything else. It's my only activity, the only thing I'm doing. I don't multitask. Maybe that's different for most people. Maybe a lot of people listen to podcasts when they're doing something else, and so they don't notice as much this issue I'm talking about with the over-structuring of the content. Maybe they don't get as bored as me because they're doing something else at the same time. Anyway, going way back now, back probably 10 minutes to what I actually wanted to talk about, the reason why I started this podcast. Well, it's related. It's related. Because I find it so difficult to find content like this Spanish with Juan, that's sort of just natural language, just someone talking about things, because I found it difficult to find content like that to listen to in the languages I'm learning. Then I started to think that probably it's for you, for the people learning English, it's probably also difficult to find content like that, like this, in English. And so I thought maybe it's worthwhile, at least it's worth giving it a try, to start a podcast where I try to talk in the same way that Juan talks, for example. I try to talk in the way that I find so nice to listen to when I'm listening to his podcast, because maybe there's other people out there who are like me and would find it very useful. A podcast in this style where I'm not really talking about anything in particular, but everything I say is still about something. Everything I say is meaningful. But we'll see. We'll see. This is only the third episode. So I'll see how this does over time. Because maybe there's so much English content, so many podcasts in English, so many YouTube videos in English available on the internet that the audience for this podcast isn't very big. Maybe not. And I've received a few comments about this podcast. Telling me that I should speak more as if I was talking to a friend, or more as if that I should talk as if, like how friends talk to each other about everyday things, about, well, nothing in particular. Often friends in real life just talk to each other about things that aren't so important. They just talk to pass the time. They talk about whatever occurs to them, whatever comes to mind. And that is my goal, like I've been saying with this podcast, just to talk about whatever comes to my mind. And I'm going to make an effort, I'm going to try to talk about everyday things. I'm going to try to not talk about very abstract or specialized topics like economics or things like that. A bit, because often, for example, economics really isn't as complicated as it seems, and it has a lot to do with our everyday lives, and I think at least can often be quite interesting. So I'll probably talk about things like that as well, but I'll try and keep it more related to the day-to-day things. But it's hard because I'm alone. It's hard to talk as if I'm talking to a friend when there's no one else here. But that's a skill that I'll learn with the time. The more I do this podcast and the more feedback I get from you, the more feedback I get in the comments from the people who listen, the better I'll be able to do the podcast. The more I'll be able to improve, the better I'll get. So don't forget to leave your thoughts, leave your feedback in the comments. Tell me what you think is good and what you think isn't so good. And if it's not a problem, if it's no trouble for you, do this for every episode. If it's not too hard, leave a comment with your thoughts for every episode, or as often as you can. As often as you can, leave a comment below. Because often I receive comments about what's wrong with a video, and I understand these comments, but it's hard to know exactly what the person means, because you can always make something a bit more or a bit less. For example, if someone says to me, these podcasts would be better if they were more, if I talked more about everyday things, or I talked as if I was with a friend, then I have an idea, my own idea, of what it means to talk like you're with a friend, what it means to talk what everyday subjects are, and all I can do, the only thing I can do, is talk a bit more like that, a bit more as if I was with a friend, a bit more. I can talk a bit more about the things that I think are everyday things. But then on that change, I need feedback. The initial comment, the initial suggestion, the first comment, doesn't help me so much if there isn't a follow-up comment. I need, after I've made the change, after I've tried to make the improvement, after I've tried to talk a bit more as if I was with a friend, then I need that person to leave another comment and tell me, yes, that's good, do it even more, that's the right direction, or no, that's not what I meant. I meant this. Because it's always hard to know what other people mean. It's really hard to know exactly what other people have in mind when they say something. So you need feedback. You need feedback, regular feedback on the changes you make. You need to make I'm going to make little changes based on your feedback, in response to your feedback. But I need continual feedback. I need you to keep telling me in which direction I should go. In every video, tell me if that was an improvement, or if things got worse. And only that way can I continue to improve. Can I continue to go in a direction that you, the listeners, want me to go in. And I think I'll leave it here for today. The episode is nearly half an hour long. Yes. So also tell me in the comments, give me ideas, leave ideas for things I can talk about. If you want me to talk about everyday things, for example, tell me what you think everyday things are. Give me some example of everyday things I could talk about. All right. See ya.